Welcome back to Week 16's edition of the IDP Plus Ranking Show here on IDP Plus Network. I'm Johnny. I'm your host tonight. Congratulations on making it into your semifinal fantasy IDP matchups. Best of luck in the semis, and we'll see you here next week for the finals. But on this episode, as always, we're going to break down the top 15 rankings that we have here on IDP Plus for Week 16 for your upcoming playoff matchups at all three positions: the defensive line, linebacker, and defensive back. So I'm going to start, as always, sharing my screen here so you can get a look of where I'm getting these rankings. Thank you to all of our viewers and subscribers who are already subscribed. I'm just going to hover over rankings here. And remember, we do have all kinds of rankings, dynasty, consensus, season, but we are talking weekly for your weekly Week 16 matchups. So the first position we're going to look up, first category, is defensive lineman. Now, as always, I state that I do the linebacker and defensive back rankings. These defensive line rankings are brought to us by Justin Fry. He is on Twitter at JFryDP, at JFRYEDP. Give him a follow. Good guy, even better. Great rankings, even better guy. So Justin's rankings for number 16. Here we go. Number 1, he's got Micah Parsons coming in off that big game last week. Number 2, Myles Garrett. 3, Trey Hendrickson. 4, Will Anderson Jr. 5, Danielle Hunter. 6, TJ Watt. Comes down from 1 to 6 here. 7, Chris Jones back in the mix. Number 8, Andrew Van Ginkel, fan favorite. 9, Josh Hines Allen. 10, Jonathan Grenard. 11, Greg Russo. Number 12, Brian Burns. 13, Jared Verse. 14, Christian Ellis. And finally, 15, Will McDonald IV. So, scrolling up to the top of this rankings here, we're going to start it off looking at Micah Parsons, who I mentioned had that big game. 4 tackles, but the big game, 4 tackles is acceptable. Nothing great, but 2 sacks Week 15 last week versus Carolina in a bad matchup for him. I told you guys it was going to be tough for him to get a sack. Well, he went and got 2. But that's just the type of player that Micah Parsons is. That's why he's number 1 on this here list, and that's why he's continued to be in the top 5, top 10 rankings throughout the year, even with some health injuries and some bad play by teammates. So Micah Parsons, you're not benching him. He's the number 1 this week. You're obviously hoping he can get another sack or 2 this week. And as far as this week, he's going to play Tampa Bay, middle of the matchup road as far as tackles, and that concerns us because Micah Parsons, is a tackle getter, so he's got a middle of the road matchup. Anything was better than last week at Carolina, so that's a little bit of an improvement. Tampa Bay's allowing just over 16 tackles per game to the defensive lineman position. On top of that, when we look at Tampa Bay, Baker Mayfield has been sacked 9 times over the last 4 games and 5 times over the last 2. So there's a good potential for Micah to get his sack or 2 in this game and make good for you once again in the semis. Looking at the number 2 player, Myles Garrett, solid game last week. Not his best, but solid game, albeit 3 tackles, a tackle for loss, and a pass defense versus KC. The bad thing is he gets the league's worst matchup as far as tackles this week in Cincinnati. They're only giving up on the season 12.4 tackles on average per game to the defensive lineman position. But on the bright side, one thing about Myles Garrett is we're more focused about the sacks than the tackles here. Joe Burrow has been sacked 7 times over the last 3 games. In his 11 games versus Cincinnati, Myles Garrett has 12 sacks. Not all those games were against Joe Burrow, but Myles Garrett not too old, so those are pretty recent. Once again, 11 games versus Cincinnati for Myles Garrett, 12 sacks. So he averages just over 1 sack a game. That's promising here for this Week 16 matchup versus the Cleveland Browns. Versus the Cincinnati Bengals. His teammate, on the counterpart, we have a Bengal, Trey Hendrickson, going against the Browns here as our number 3 defensive lineman. Trey Hendrickson last week little subtle game. Did have that forced fumble that helped save the day, but as it stood, 2 tackles, a tackle for loss with that aforementioned forced fumble versus Tennessee. Kind of let us down. It was a juicy matchup. 12 and a half sacks for Hendrickson, leads the league. So we were hoping he can get at the quarterback, at Will Levis, and turned out to also be Mason Rudolph as well. But water under the bridge, not playing Tennessee this week. He is going to play, as we mentioned, Cleveland. So not only is he playing in the AFC North, those are always bloodbaths, he also gets a change of quarterback. It's going to be Dorian Thompson-Robinson, as Jameis Winston is no longer the quarterback. But we will look for Jameis Winston to find a good stat here. Jameis Winston was sacked 12 times over the last 4 games. And of course, it's not a perfect barometer. Jameis Winston, number one, is a quarterback that often does get sacked, hangs onto the ball, not afraid. So that, does skew the data. But overall, the Browns' offensive line, we can say, allowed Jameis Winston to get sacked 12 times over the last 4 games, which is a nice clean average of 3, which is promising. You've got Nick Chubb out in this matchup. Maybe the run game's, hurting a little bit. Maybe Cleveland's forced to throw the ball more, and maybe that allows Trey Hendrickson more, more snaps to get pressure on the quarterback. So that's promising as well. So Trey Hendrickson here, although it's not a great opportunity for tackles, but Trey Hendrickson, what we've come to know for him is more so concerning about the sack. So decent shot, to get a sack this week. Then, like I said, AFC North matchup, so it's going to be a low scoring, heavy defensive affair. Good week for Trey Hendrickson to make off on this number 3 spot. Moving on to number 4, we got Will Anderson. Nice week last week, 3 tackles and a sack with a forced fumble versus Miami. Miami was a top 5 matchup as far as tackles, with allowing 17.9 tackles per game. I'm sorry, he plays Miami this week. Miami is a top 5 matchup as far as tackles, just under 18, which is great. Maybe Will Anderson can get 3 or maybe even 4 or 5 tackles, even though that's not what we're accustomed to. He's in a better matchup than he was last week. Tua has been sacked 10 times the last 4 games. And to add some sprinkles on top of the ice cream, we have Will Anderson Jr. having 3 sacks over his last 3 games. So Tua, 2.5 sacks a game over the last 4, and Anderson averaging a sack a game over the last 3. So, that's a pretty deadly storm there. Water meeting fire, big clash. I think Will Anderson is in a good spot to get a sack this week versus Kansas City, especially with a banged up Patrick Mahomes. Maybe he's not as mobile, can't elude the pressure as much. So a little bit of enhanced sack ability there for Will Anderson. Coming in at number 5, we have Danielle Hunter. Danielle Hunter had a great week last week, 4 tackles, 1.5 sacks versus Miami. He's got another top 8 matchup. And I'm sorry, I said that, they were playing, Houston was playing Miami. They're actually playing Kansas City, but the last week they played Miami. So Danielle Hunter, last week versus Miami was a top 8 matchup. He's going to get another one this week for Kansas City as far as tackles allowed to defensive linemen. Mahomes has been sacked 13 times in the last 4 games, but 0 in week 14. So as of recent, if we're looking just at last week, even when he was hobbled, did not commit a sack, did not allow a sack, I should say. But still, he's been sacked 13 times over those 3 weeks then. So, just over 4 sacks a game is a pretty nice average there for Mahomes. So, on one hand, he didn't get sacked last week. On the other hand, 3 games, 13 sacks. So take it as you will, but Mahomes is hobbled. That's no doubt about it. Good chance for Danielle Hunter to get another sack, as well as Will Anderson in this game versus Kansas City. Moving on to our number 6 in Pittsburgh, TJ Watt. Not on the injury report anymore. Going to play this week. He is indeed healthy. He's going to get Baltimore in Week 16. In Week 11 versus Baltimore, he had 3 tackles and a sack, which is a good barometer here. It's a good game for him, AFC North matchup. He's coming off a great game where we had 7 tackles and 2 sacks versus Philly in a great matchup. Well, he's going to get another great matchup, although a little bit of a downgrade here versus Baltimore. Lamar Jackson has been sacked 6 times over the last 2 games. And on top of that, Baltimore, I mentioned, top 5 matchup, actually, not just top 8. They're top 5 matchup as far as tackles, allowing 17.6 to opposing defensive linemen. So you've got a good combo here. You've got good tackle matchup as far as Lamar Jackson being sacked 6 times over the last 2. I believe Micah McFadden got to him last week, even in that sloppy game for the Giants. So, as elusive as Lamar is, he is getting sacked over this last 2 games, specifically 3 times a game. So this is a good time to have TJ Watt to start him in your semis. And of course, if you have him, you're throwing him out there. It doesn't matter if he's 1 or 10 on this list. Moving on to number 7, we got Chris Jones, 3 tackles and a tackle for loss, week 15 versus Cleveland. You're especially starting Chris Jones if you're in leagues that need defensive tackles. However, this is a bottom 8 matchup when we look at tackles to opposing defensive linemen. But on the other hand, Chris Jones, this is a great opportunity for him to get a sack. Stroud has been sacked 10 times over the last 3 games. So Chris Jones, even though he's had an up and down type of year, he's come into his own this last couple games. He's had 11 tackles and 2 sacks over the last 3, and especially in leagues where you need defensive linemen, Chris Jones gets a little boost there. So not only are we talking defensive tackles, where you need a defensive tackle, but not only are we talking defensive tackles, we're talking defensive linemen as a whole, and Justin has got him here at 7. So nice, nice spot for Chris Jones, nice landing spot in a good matchup, likely to get a sack this week for Jones. Moving on, we got Andrew Van Ginkel at number 8. Weak game for him as far as box score with 2 tackles versus Chicago. Over the last 4 games, he's kind of been dull. That's why we've seen him move down to number 8 here. Over the last 4 games, 11 tackles, only 1 tackle for loss, and 1 pass defensed. That's it. So he's been pretty quiet over the last month. He's got a bad matchup this week as far as tackles with Seattle. They're a bottom 5 matchup, only allow 13.6. So, as much as it's a great time to have Van Ginkel, he's been rolling. He's a guy that's got you here. He's continued to be on this list, and I think 8 is a realistic understanding of this is a bad matchup for tackles. But again, Van Ginkel is a guy who, like we said before, can defy that. Doesn't absolutely need tackles to make doesn't even need a sack to make his day. He can get a couple pass defense, forced fumbles, interceptions. He can run those back for touchdowns like we've seen. So Andrew Van Ginkel, even though it's a bad matchup on paper for as far as getting tackles, we all know that Geno Smith has been a sack machine as far as getting sacked this year. He was hurt last week in that game versus Green Bay. We don't know if his ankle or his knee is going to be 100%. So you've got a quarterback who's been sacked a lot, and he's not at his best health. So Andrew Van Ginkel, pretty likely to have a good shot to get a sack this week. So number 9 is going to be Josh Hines Allen. For Josh Hines Allen, kind of a weak game last week, only 2 tackles versus the Jets. Week 16, he's got a matchup versus Las Vegas and Aiden O'Connell. It's a top 12 matchup. Vegas is pretty juicy as far as giving tackles to the opponent's defensive linemen. They give up 15.8 on the season, but over the last 3 games, Vegas has actually spiked up to 17.7. So things are trending up there for Vegas as far as a tackle matchup for defensive linemen. They gave up 3 sacks to Tampa Bay last week, and I know that was Desmond Ridder. It's going to be Adrian O'Connell this year. A little bit different, but still, Las Vegas's offensive line at least gave up 3 sacks last week to Tampa Bay. So Josh Hines Allen, another good opportunity to get a sack here, but just keep aware that he is somebody who's had a tremendously low floor. We can tell. Albeit in a bad matchup last week, only 2 tackles. So if you have somebody who you have a gut feeling on that maybe a better start than Josh Hines Allen, that's discretion. I can understand where you're coming from. So high floor, nonetheless. Josh Allen's got a high floor, but still has that high ceiling, but still has that low floor. So Josh Hines Allen, tread with caution, but high upside. Number 10, Jonathan Grenard, one of my favorites. This week, I'm rolling him out in a couple leagues, and the reason is because It's only 3 points a sack, and you get 2 points a solo, 1 point for an assisted tackle. So this is a tackle-heavy league, and Jonathan Grenard is almost averaging 4 tackles a game. Last game versus Chicago, 6 tackles. And, of course, he was playing Caleb Williams. We knew it was going to happen. He got a sack, and on top of that, sprinkles on the ice cream, a forced fumble. So, again, 49 tackles in 11 games, averaging just over 4 tackles. He does have also 11 sacks, 4 forced fumbles. I'm sorry, in 14 games, he has 49 tackles. So, yeah, just under 4 tackles. But in those 14 games, 11 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, and 2 pass defense. So, Jonathan Grenard has been a machine, not only getting at the quarterback with 11 sacks, but has a pretty nice tackle floor as well. You know, what it seems like this season. He's got a bottom 5 matchups. However, as far as tackles, but on the bright side, Geno Smith, like we had mentioned, getting sacked 11 times in the last 4 games. Seattle's not a great matchup as far as tackles, and that's okay because Jonathan Grenard has excelled at getting at the quarterback. Like we said, it was likely to happen last week versus Chicago. It did, and it's very likely to happen again this week versus Seattle. Geno Smith emits a lot of sacks, and so that's what we're looking for this week. And maybe if we can get 4 or 5 tackles, who knows? Maybe on paper doesn't always mean what happens in the game. So game script could take over this game, and Jonathan Grenard can have a nice tackle floor. So solid start here at number 10. If you got any of these top 10 guys, definitely roll them out. I'd mentioned my only hesitation was Josh Hines-Allen, but in a good matchup, I'm sure there's not too much out there, and you're probably looking at matchup based, not really season long. Vested veterans, you're probably looking at a guy who did good last week, and you don't really want to play those games here in the semis. So getting outside the top 10 at number 11, we have Greg Rousseau, who had a nice game last week, 4 tackles and a sack. I thought it was going to be tough for him to get a sack versus Jared Goff and the Lions. They weren't giving up many sacks over the last few games, but not that they gave up many this game, but Greg Rousseau got his sack. So congrats if you started Greg Rousseau this past week. Looking at week 16, he's going to get New England, which is a little bit lesser of a matchup, a little bit less sexy. They're about middle of the road, allowing 15.5 tackles per game. But when you look at the sack department, Drake May has been sacked 10 times over the last 3 games. And again, how I said last week, when you're looking at Greg Rousseau, you're probably not considering the tackle aspect as much as you are the sack. And he does have a good opportunity here against Drake May and the Patriots to get a sack this week. So Greg Rousseau, a fine start. Moving on, Brian Burns at number 12. Brian Burns is questionable, but it does look like he's going to play. Nice game last week in the sack department. Got registered a sack with 2 tackles versus Baltimore. So if you have if you roster Burns in a league where you're getting 4 or 5 points a sack, he ended up making up his day. Week 16 this week, he's going to get Atlanta, which is a top 8 matchup as far as tackles go. And they're allowing the most tackles to the defensive linemen over the last 3 weeks with 24. Absolutely, that's the most over the last 3 weeks. So, things are trending up there when your defensive lineman is facing Atlanta. Keep in mind, Kirk Cousins, although he was sacked 3 times versus Las Vegas last week, he is not going to be playing. This is going to be a Michael Penix show. My honest opinion is, they're going to hand the ball off. They're probably going to be up in this game to New York, probably going to be able to afford a couple extra carries to Bijan Robinson. And that's great for Brian Burns owners because he has more opportunities to get tackles. Maybe, you could say that if they run the ball, it hurts his chance to get a sack, which is kind of true. But nonetheless, Brian Burns in a juicy matchup as of recent versus Atlanta. And, Atlanta gave up, like we said, doesn't matter if it's Cousins, who was me at quarterback last week. They gave up 3 sacks to Las Vegas. So good opportunity for Brian Burns not only to have a good showing in the tackle department, but get a sack here. And keep in mind, he does have some extra motivation. He has 8 sacks on the season. He needs 4.5 more in these last 3 games to match his 22 season, which with his personal record of 12.5. So I'm sure he's going to try to break that mold and have an incentive to get paid. So Brian Burns probably going to gut it out and solid top 12 play here this week in the semis. Next is going to be Jared Verse. Jared Verse, huge upside, usually a safe tackle floor type of guy too, but we've seen him struggle, especially last week, only 2 tackles versus San Francisco. It was a wacky game, but even further than that, he's had no sacks over the last 5 games, which is concerning. And Jared Verse isn't a player that, if you roster him, you know that he doesn't have to get a sack to make good for you on any given week. But the fact that he's had none over the last 5 games, and he's getting a bottom 12 matchup versus the Jets this week. Rodgers has been sacked 6 times over the last 3 games. That's an average of 2 sacks a game over the last 3. So, maybe you're looking at it and saying Jared Verse, this is his week to get a sack on Aaron Rodgers, but keep in mind the tackle floor looks a little bit lighter. He's only had 2 tackles last week and no sacks over the last 5. So Jared Verse may be a player that you're having a tough decision about. Maybe if there's someone later on the list that you like, somebody that you might spot start a guy, or you might find a guy who is a top player but has a couple down weeks is available. Maybe you're thinking about starting him over Jared Verse due to his downward trajectory as of recent. Moving on, number 14, we have our little cheat code at the defensive lineman position here. Really a linebacker, Christian Ellis for New England. He had 5 tackles last week versus Arizona in a great matchup. Only played 53% of snaps, usually about 55-60% of snaps. Week 16, he's going to get Buffalo, who have allowed 16 tackles to linebackers over the last 3 games, which is solid. It's a great matchup. Tackle-heavy leagues, you might consider Christian Ellis. If you're only getting 1 point for a solo, half a point for an assist, you don't need to look at Christian Ellis. If you're trying to get sacks, don't look at Christian Ellis. But, again, in tackle-heavy leagues, you're probably not going to get a sack. You got to understand that. He's only had 1.5 sacks in 11 games played. But if you're looking for 5 or 6 combined tackles out of a defensive lineman and he has eligibility in your league, then Christian Ellis is a cheat code at the position, and you can take advantage. And quite frankly, that's a good option if you are in a league where he has DL eligibility and you get 2 points a solo, 1 for an assist. I'm not going to take a shot. Look what happened with Nick Bonito. Nick Bonito was riding so hot. Came into last night, 2 tackles. Like you were aiming for that dagger. You wanted 20 points, but really you got 2 or 3. So Christian Ellis, don't put yourself in that situation. Your defensive lineman is most likely not going to win or lose your semifinal matchup. But if you roll out somebody that gets 2 points, that's gonna hurt you more than it helps. That's gonna really make it tough for you to come back. So play it safe. Take your 8 to 10 points here, and let your offense, let other positions win your matchup this week. Last but not least, we got Will McDonald, the 4th from the Jets. He gets the Rams this week. Will McDonald has been light in the box score as of recent. Justin's got a hunch here, though. Only 2 tackles last week versus Jacksonville in a bad matchup. Week 16, this week, he does get a tremendous matchup, way better matchup versus the Rams, who are allowing 17 tackles per game to the defensive linemen over the last 3 games. But McDonald only has 23 tackles on the season. So this is a play where we're looking at the sack factor. Now, Matt Stafford has been sacked 7 times over the last 3 games, which is nice. It's over 2 a game. But he had 0 games he got sacked 0 times over the last 2 games. So really, when we look at that 7 sacks over the last 3 games, that was 7 sacks in 1 game. He did not get sacked, Stafford, these past 2. So Will McDonald, on one hand, you look at it and say 7 over the last 3, 7 in a game. That's a lot. Very likely to get a sack, and maybe Will McDonald does here. I assume that the Rams are going to have the ball. They're going to be able to sustain drives, and Will McDonald is a great edge rusher. He should have done better in box scores than he has this year. So Justin has a hunch, and I respect it. Maybe he's looking at the fact that Stafford did get sacked 7 times in that 1 game, or that maybe he just has a hunch that Will McDonald, this is his week. So number 15, rounding out the list. Finally, last but not least, Will McDonald. Right now, I am going to move into our linebacker rankings, where I do our linebacking rankings over here at IDP+. So I'm going to hover over rankings and then just go to weekly linebacker to get after it. So number 1 on my list this week had a down week. Somebody asked me in the comments, should I start Micah McFadden over him? I told him I was awfully tempted, but I just couldn't do it, and I was wrong. But you know what? He's back up on the list. He's got the best matchup you could ask for this week, and that is Roquan Smith coming in at number 1. Number 2 is going to be Zaire Franklin. 3, Zach Bond. Number 4, Nakobe Dean, his counterpart. Number 5, Jamian Sherwood. Number 6, Eric Kendricks. I did not mean to have Grant Stewart up there. That's a double 6. We're going to skip him. We're going to look at 7, Diane Henley, already played. Number 8, Levante David. Number 9, Caden Ellis. Number 10, Josie Jewell. Number 11, Micah McFadden. Number 12, Patrick Queen. 13, Jordan Brooks. 14, Ernest Jones. And finally, last but not least, the vet, Demario Davis. So, back to the top. Number 1, Roquan Smith, who I'd mentioned had a dud last week, let you down, but you're still here, back for more in the semis, so he didn't kill you. But Roquan, bad taste in our mouth. 5 tackles, pass defense versus the Giants in a decent matchup. But this week it changes. It was bad game script last week. I'm willing to throw that asterisk next to his name. This week he's going to get Pittsburgh, who allow the most tackles to linebackers in the league per game with an average of 19.6. So Roquan Smith, don't really need to spend too much time on him. If you got him, start him this week. Don't worry about last week. He's getting the best matchup you could ask for out there. So if you're looking for the last time that Roquan Smith played Pittsburgh, let's see what he did here. I believe that was week 11. Roquan, he had, give me 1 second here. Roquan Smith versus Pittsburgh week 11, 13 tackles. In my league, he had 23 points. So 8 solos, 5 assists. Again, it's a great matchup, best you could ask for. I expect Pittsburgh to be down in this game, and game flow is going to be good. That's what you want if you have Roquan. I'm sorry, Pittsburgh's going to be down, and that hurts Roquan a little bit, but still, tough game. Last game, week 11, ended 16-18. I expect this to be a low-scoring game. Roquan is going to be on the field plenty. I expect him and I will mention, but Patrick Queen on the other side to have both big games in the tackle box. So Roquan Smith is my number 1 this week. Again, it doesn't matter if he's 1, 3, whatever he is, you're starting him. Don't overthink it. Number 2 is going to be Zaire Franklin versus Tennessee. Franklin, tremendous week last week, 9 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, interception, and a pass defensed in a horrible matchup versus Denver. So actually makes Denver look a little bit better now that Indianapolis went there. Him and Speed both had nice games. We know EJ Speed is out this game, so of course I have Grant Stewart here at number 6. He is a nice deep play, but that was a mistake here having him at number 6. Anyway, going back to Zaire, he's rolling right now. He gets a decent matchup with Tennessee. They're top 12. Actually, they allow the 11th most tackles per game to linebacker. Zaire Franklin's been incredibly productive over the last 3 games, over the whole season, but let's look at these last 3 games specifically. 34 tackles, so an average of over 10, checks the box, 2.5 sacks, 4 tackles for loss, an interception, a forced fumble, and 2 passes defense. Just a caveat here, keep in mind something that could hurt Zaire Franklin's value a little bit here is if Tony Pollard, he is questionable. He might not play this week, and of course that would mean that Tajay Spears would be the lead back. I don't think they would run it 15 to 20 times with Spears. Maybe more of a pass approach there with Mason Rudolph as the quarterback now. So Zaire Franklin is just a stalwart. You're throwing him out there, but keep in mind Tony Pollard missing this game would hurt him a little bit. Not much to drop him out of my top 8 rankings, however. Number 3 is Zach Bond from Philly. Had a dud last week in the best matchup you could ask for. Not a good look for Roquan Smith, but I'm willing to throw an asterisk next to this this box score for Zach Bond. His counterpart, Nakobe Dean, had 10 tackles, but this is just not Zach Bond's game. Finished with 5 solo tackles. Falls back to earth this week versus Washington. Still a top 12 matchup, though, and hasn't had back-to-back clunkers this year. So I'm not too worried about Zach Bond. He did have a few clunkers along this tremendous year he's had, but again, none of them have been back-to-back. So he's going to rebound this week, he's going to get you your 8 to 10 tackles or more. So Zach Bond, fire him up as usual. Same with his teammate, Nakobe Dean, here at number 4. Nakobe Dean actually outperformed Zach Bond last week. 10 tackles and a forced fumble. He's had 8 or more tackles over the last 5 games and 10 or more tackles in the last 3. So anytime a player has 10 or more tackles consecutively, no matter if it's Jeremy Chin in weeks 10 through 13 or Nakobe Dean right here, right now, you're going to start that player. And he's got a great matchup, full wings up and, smooth sailing for Nakobe Dean. So this top 4 has been really juicy. Let's keep it rolling here with number 5, Jamien Sherwood versus the Rams. I don't really care who Sherwood plays. He had 9 tackles versus Jacksonville in a horrible matchup last week. So he's got another tough draw versus the Rams. They're a little bit better of a matchup, but still bottom 12, only allowing 15.9 tackles per game to linebackers. But I think the Rams are up in this game. Game flow should be on Sherwood's side to get the ball. A lot of Kyron Williams, a lot of runs up the middle like they like to do there in LA. So Jamien Sherwood, last 5 games, he's had 54 tackles. Don't overthink this. He's averaging over 10 over the last 5. Just start him. If you have Jamien Sherwood, don't worry about that red next to his matchup. Start him with confidence. You can't do much better. Number 6, Eric Kendricks, who's questionable, is a little bit likelier to play, I believe, than he was last week, but still played. I'm sorry, when he missed a week, I believe that was 2 weeks ago. But I think he's more likely now than he was then to suit up. Did practice a bit. Last week had a down week though. Saved the day with an interception, but only had 5 tackles and a pass defense outside of that versus Carolina. But it was a bad matchup. We're going to throw a little asterisk next to his name. Eric Kendricks has been pretty solid for about 8 or 10 tackles a game this season. He's got a better matchup with Tampa Bay in Week 16. Now, it's not great on paper versus Tampa Bay, but last week, if you're looking, most recent, what happened, Rachaad White and Bucky Irving carried the ball 30 times and combined for 4 catches. So the running backs, those 2 running backs combined for 34 touches, an average of 17 each. So I think, if that's the game script here versus who's he get this week? Let's see, Kendricks versus Tampa Bay. Yeah. I think if Tampa Bay runs the ball like they did last week, then I think that Eric Kendricks is going to be in a great spot to get that 8 to 10 tackles. Don't look at last week and say, is he really going to return to form? He is. It's a better matchup. He had a horrible matchup last week. Eric Kendricks, don't worry that Overshown is out. That does not, in my opinion, affect his output as far as getting stats here. I'm still starting Eric Kendricks with confidence. Moving on, we're skipping Stewart. That's for all you streamers out there. That's a free one, freebie. Number 7, Diane Henley. Tremendous start. I wish I would have had him at number 1. Made me look good here, though. Had him in my top 10. Tremendous output here for Henley. 10 tackles and a tackle for loss versus the Chargers. And I was a little worried about Henley. That's why I dropped him down a little bit. No Dobbins. Do they run as much with Edwards and Vidal? Of course they did with Edwards. A couple goal line touchdowns there for him. But Henley was all over the place. He doesn't need the running back to carry the ball 30 times to get his tackles. He's just all over the place, sideline to sideline. So he's going to be probably a top 8 play the rest of the year. Pencil him in. So if you started Henley, like myself, props to you. Moving on, number 8, Levante David. He's been an animal machine as of recent. Gets a nice matchup versus Dallas. This is a top 5 matchup versus Dallas, who allow just under 18 tackles to linebackers per game. Levante last week had 12 tackles. Very nice with a sack and a half versus the Chargers. Last 4 games, David's been incredibly productive. 31 tackles, 2.5 sacks, 2 tackles for loss, a pass defensed, a fumble forced, and a fumble recovered. This past week, he crossed 100 tackles, the 100 tackle threshold, and he has tied his high sack mark with 5.5. He, going back to 2013, is the last time that he hit that marker. So he has tied it. He's hungry. He's going to look to eclipse that. So hopefully he can get another half sack or a whole sack this week versus Dallas. I expect Tampa Bay to be up in this game. So Maybe that means that Levante can rush the quarterback, more opportunities to rush the quarterback and get that sack. But regardless, even if he doesn't, Levante David is in a fine top 5 matchup here versus Dallas to get tackles. So Levante keeps starting him with confidence. Number 9, Caden Ellis from Atlanta. Tremendous game. Tremendous last 3 games, but looking at last week specifically, 11 tackles and a sack. Week 15, the last 4 games have been tremendous for Caden Ellis. He's a tackle machine. He's had 36 tackles and 3 sacks, 3 back-to-back games with a sack. Tremendous, especially if you're getting more than 3 points for that. Caden Ellis, I'm surprised I haven't ranked this high because he's just not really my type of player. Usually he hovers around 5-6 tackles. Maybe he gets you a sack. That's not really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a high volume tackle guy. But it seems like since Troy Anderson has been put on IR, things have really clicked for Caden Ellis over the last month. He's obviously getting more opportunities for tackles as Anderson is not out there. But then you look at the sack department. He's not just taking over the run stopping game in the middle, the communicator. He's also getting at the quarterback. He's got a sack in the last 3. So Caden Ellis, when you throw somebody who has the potential to get you double-digit tackles and a sack, makes him really juicy. So the upside is really high on Caden Ellis, and he seems to have a great floor. So I can't, not include him on this top 10 anymore. He's just proved himself. Moving on, number 10, Josie Jewell from Carolina. He gets one of the best matchups, the second best matchup you could ask for versus Arizona. This week, they allow the second most tackles to linebackers with 18.4. So Josie Jewell, extremely productive. Another guy, 10 tackles in a pass defense in Week 15 versus Dallas. He's had 10 or more tackles over the last 3 games. He's absolutely rolling right now. Also has 3.5 sacks over the last 4. And I know that Josie Jewell, the production over those last 3-4 weeks makes him like the LB 2 or 3 at worst. But still, it's Josie Jewell. He still deals with hamstring injuries. Still is missing practices this week. I believe he's taken off the injury report, so it is looking like he's gonna be healthy again. But again, Josie Jewell, if you have him, you're starting him. You can make a case for him to be a top 5 linebacker this week. So don't look at him and say, there's just so many other guys on the list. I have him on this list. I don't have Robert Spillane on this list. So Robert Spillane, bigger name in the IDP community, but like Josie Jewell, Caden Ellis, these guys have just been rolling. So absolutely, I'm starting them over a guy like Spillane, over a guy like Bobby Wagner, over a guy like Terrell Bernard, over a guy like Fred Warner. So here we are. That's just my opinion. Number 11, I'm sure if you have Josie Jewell, you agree with that too. Number 11, Micah McFadden. Here he is. Boom, this is 3 linebackers in a row, Ellis, Jewell, and now McFadden, who this is their first time I've had them on the top 15 all season. But they are all systems go right now. Micah McFadden, tremendous game, 11 tackles with that sack on Lamar versus Baltimore. This was his second game playing 100% of snaps, which is really a travesty that he was not playing 100% of snaps earlier in the season until Okereke got hurt, because McFadden would have just been lighting up the box score. I mean, he's over 100 tackles now on the season. I bet he'd be sitting at 120, 130 if he played 100% of snaps. But we finally get to see it. 2 games now. Over those 2 games where he's assumed the starting role, 22 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, and a sack in just 2 games. So an average of over 10 tackles a game, 3 tackles for loss, and a half a sack is pretty darn good. He does have a bad on paper matchup versus Atlanta in Week 16, but keep in mind, Atlanta's been better over the last 3 games, allowing 16.3 tackles per game. So that checks out. I'm not too worried about the matchup anymore when you look at the last 3 games. Penix is not going to Kirk Cousins is not going to start this game. It's going to be Michael Penix. So, maybe they're able to run the ball more with Bijan Robinson, because Penix isn't, to get him comfortable. He maybe not comfortable first. They're going to give Bijan a couple extra carries. That would not be the worst thing in the world for Micah McFadden, but it doesn't matter here. If you look at the matchup, I mean, I'm in leagues where I might start him over Eric Kendricks. I started him I started Micah McFadden last week over EJ Speed at Denver, and they both had 20 points, so it was a moot point. But actually, I should have started Micah McFadden over Eric Kendricks last week, and I would have had the best of both worlds. But anyhow, don't be afraid to make that call. I mean, if we're talking about top 3 linebackers here, if you're looking at Zach Bond or one of the big dogs, yeah, I'm going to start Roquan. I'm going to start Zach Bond still over Micah McFadden, but it's awfully tempting. If Micah McFadden had the best matchup versus Pittsburgh, I would definitely start him over some big dogs this week, but it is a bad matchup on paper. So, expect 8 tackles, maybe get lucky, might get 9 or 10. So Micah McFadden is a sturdy play here, nonetheless, playing 100% of snaps. Moving on to number 12, we got Patrick Queen. I love him. 11 tackles versus Philadelphia. He is finally in form, heated up. He's been a tremendous tackler over the last 4 games with 37 tackles. That's an average of almost 10. A guy who's doing that, coming close to 10 tackles per game, you're starting him, and especially makes this list because it's a revenge game once again versus Baltimore for Patrick Queen. This time he's coming home to Baltimore. Week 11 in Pittsburgh, he had 10 tackles, double digit. Now he's going back to his stomping grounds, back to Baltimore. I think nonetheless, no less than 10 tackles here. So I'm predicting a double-digit tackle game for Patrick Queen in this revenge game. He has had back-to-back double-digit games, so let's make it 3 for 3 here, Queen. I expect Baltimore to be up in this game, so that would help Patrick Queen get more opportunities for tackles, running the ball. A lot of Derrick Henry I predict in this game. So Patrick Queen, if you got him, throw him out there, start him. Moving on next, I don't love him this week. I'm not really excited about the matchup. San Francisco is not great on paper, and they're also going to be without Isaac Guerendo. But if you have Jordan Brooks, you probably want to start him. 8 tackles last week, a tackle for loss, and a fumble recovered versus Houston. Over the last 4 games, very productive for Brooks. 35 tackles, a sack, 4 tackles for loss, 2 fumbles recovered, and a pass defense. Like I said, a big problem with this week. He gets a tough draw versus San Francisco, who are allowing under 16 tackles per game to linebackers. Isaac Guerendo's out. Are they going to run it that often with Patrick Taylor? Maybe 10 to 15 carries. I really don't expect. If McCaffrey was in this game, big difference. But we're looking at Patrick Taylor, maybe Israel Abenakanda. So Jordan Brooks, one thing about him is it looks like over the last half of the season at least, that Jordan Brooks, you don't have to rely on tackles to get production out of him. He's been able to get interceptions, force fumbles, pick up fumbles, tackles for loss, do a whole multitude of different things. So don't just look at this and say it's a bad opportunity in tackles. That's kind of what I'm doing, and I'm kind of putting him in a box. But yeah, on the bright side, Jordan Brooks has been making plays, not only just getting tackles. So still very hard to sit if you have him. Still in my top 15. Very productive, playing 100% of snaps. So Jordan Brooks, still in this top 15. Moving on here at number 14, I got Ernest Jones. I just love Ernest Jones so much. You can make a case for a couple guys to maybe be inside this top 15. Like I mentioned, Terrell Bernard versus Detroit, a great start. Just didn't make the cut. Spillane, big name, didn't make the cut. Wagner's. But right now I'm going to take Tyrese Knight's another guy too. But Ernest Jones for Seattle versus Minnesota. Minnesota is a top 12 matchup, but they've been a little bit stingier as far as allowing tackles to linebackers over the last 3 weeks, over the last month, I should say. But still, I'm starting Ernest Jones here. He seems to be a safe 8 to 10 tackle kind of guy. He's had 8 or more tackles in the last 7 games straight. So to me, again, don't go for a guy who's going to give you 5 points or 25. And if you're trying to do that and you can start Ernest Jones, just start Ernest Jones. He's just a sturdier play. He might get you 12 points. He might get you 20, but it's not going to kill you. It might help you win, but don't let your starting linebacker kill you for the week. Don't take huge risks. That risk factor absolutely goes into these rankings here. Jordan Brooks doesn't have much risk. He's pretty safe of a floor. So I'm more willing to take a shot on him than I am Fred Warner. Was that big game last week a fluke or not? It's not going to be raining and a bunch of running plays all game in this game. So be safe here in the playoffs in the semis. Take your 10 points, take your 12s, and win it some other way. But because your opponent's probably going to aim for the sky and they're going to get Nick Bonito, they're going to get 3 tackles. When you get a guy that gets 5 or 6, and then you win it in other positions. But Ernest Jones here, going back to him, top 12 matchup. We did see TJ Edwards last week versus Minnesota get 8 tackles and a sack. So even though Minnesota's been a little bit stingier to linebackers, I do believe the LB2 is affected more by that than the LB1. Of course, TJ Edwards is the LB1 there, and he excelled. So I think that's the same kind of thing we're looking at here with Ernest Jones. And I still like Tyrese Knight too, even though he's not on this top 15, but he's still a fine start this week. Moving on, last one of the week. First time making this list all season, but definitely deserves it by this point, is Demario Davis. Last week, 14 tackles, a sack, 2 tackles for loss versus Washington. In a fine matchup. It was a great top 8 matchup. Demario Davis has actually quietly had 10 or more tackles in the last 3 out of 5 games for him. This one's going to be in Lambeau. I think it's going to be good game script. I think we all think it's going to be good game script for for the Packers in this game. I mean, the Saints have so many missing players. Maybe Marquez Valdez-Scantling isn't even going to play. Doesn't look like Kamara is going to play. It's Spencer Rattler. They've got practice squad signees going to start this game. So, I expected maybe there's going to be cold weather. If that's the case, it's even better for Demario Davis. Jordan Love run a lot of plays up the middle with Josh Jacobs, and a lot of opportunities for Demario Davis to get tackles. And then you throw in the factor that Green Bay is just going to be at home. They're going to be up in this game. Probably going to be a lot of game script that's going to help Davis, a lot of running the ball, and a lot of plays that aren't really deep throws, more short throws in the middle. Keep things contained, and I think that's going to help Demario Davis get another double-digit tackle performance here versus Green Bay. So just because he's old, I think he led linebackers in sacks last year. So Demario Davis, another guy, not only going to get you over 120 tackles, but again, 14 tackles and a sack last week. So the old man can still hang. So Demario Davis, that might be somebody that you're tempted to start over a Terrell Bernard, over a Matt Milano, over one of those bigger names. But he's been rolling right now, and I think this is a great time to start him. I think Demario Davis shows he has a huge upside still and a safe floor. So maybe week 17, a different story and a different matchup, but right here, right now, Demario Davis, to me, top 15. All right, that wraps up the linebackers. We're going to take you to the last segment here, defensive backs. Coming in for my rankings here at defensive back, number 1 is going to be still in a bad matchup, Budda Baker. Number 2, another bad matchup, Nick Cross. 3, Kevin Byard. 4, Julian Love. 5, Kyle Hamilton. 6, Brandon Jones. 7, Derwin James. Both those guys played. Number 8, Grant Delpit. DeMonte Kazee is not supposed to be there. If I don't have a number on my rankings, they put him, I think, wherever they want. So excuse DeMonte Kazee. Number 9, Xavier Woods. Number 10, Kyle Duggar. Number 11, Brian Branch. 12, Dane Belton. 13, Ugo Amadi. 14, Xavier McKinney. And 15, Jeremy Chin. So going back up to the top of the league, I had mentioned number 1, number 2 both have bad matchups, but they've just been such stalwarts, such models of consistency. I can't budge them. Budda Baker, let's look at him first. Had a tremendous game last week, 10 tackles. Just, the standard Budda Baker we've been accustomed to seeing. 7 solos, 3 assists. This week, he gets Carolina. It's a bottom 8 matchup. They're only allowing 12 tackles to the safety position per game. So it's going to be rough here for Budda Baker, but if there's somebody to break that mold and defy the odds, it's going to be Budda. So not many safeties, defensive backs here I can say I'm willing to bank on 8 or more tackles. But, yeah, I think 8's a good number here for Budda Baker, which still makes him elite. And Budda Baker's had some tough matchups before and excelled, so I'm not really too worried here. If you have Budda Baker, don't overthink it. Start him and Nick Cross who had a down week last week, only 5 tackles, but he did have an interception and a pass defense, so that kind of saved the day versus Denver. And that was a good matchup versus Denver. We expected Nick Cross to do a little bit better, so we're overthinking it now. We're thinking like, oh, is Nick Cross, crumbling? Um, we also do get a Tennessee team who is the third worst matchup to the safeties as far as tackles, only allowing 11 a game. Now, don't get too scared. These stats are from the whole year when the majority of the reps were taken by Will Levis. We are not going to see Will Levis. He exited in the third quarter. Mason Rudolph came in, and I can't believe it. From the third quarter on, not even the full third quarter, somewhere in the third quarter when Levis got hurt, Mason Rudolph came on and got 21 completions in 1.5 quarters. So I think this Tennessee offense we're going to see with Mason Rudolph and what they did, the end of the last week, used a lot of Tajay Spears, a lot of completions, a lot of throwing the ball. So that might be what it looks like here versus Indianapolis, and that's great for Nick Cross. Again, don't look at this matchup and say, it's horrible on paper. He's not going to do well. I do think this is an asterisk next to the game because it's a different quarterback, and Tennessee is going to be thrown pretty often. So Nick Cross, Budda Baker, still keeping number 1 and 2. Number 3 is going to be Kevin Byard. Pretty productive last week versus Minnesota. 6 tackles and a pass defense. He gets Detroit this week, who allowed the 7th most tackles to safeties, with that being 14.3. So Kevin Byard, again, very productive as of recent. Had a bad matchup versus Minnesota last week and excelled. Still got you 12 or 13 points. Maybe more if pass defenses are worth more than 1 point in your league. So Kevin Byard, again, don't overthink it. If you have him, start him. There's not many better options than him. Moving on, Julian Love here at number 4 last week versus Green Bay. Had a solid game, 7 tackles and a fumble recovered over his last 3 games. He's had 20 tackles, a fumble recovered, and 4 passes defensed. Last week it was Green Bay. This week is going to be Minnesota. Minnesota is, I just mentioned, a rough matchup to safeties, but they have been better over the last 3 games, allowing 13 tackles to safeties over those last 3 games. So kind of falling in the lower to middle tier there for Minnesota as far as matchup-wise, as far as tackles. But Julian Love is somebody who, you can't find a player like him out there at this position. Somebody who the last 2 years, 120 or more tackles, the only safety to do that, the only one that can say that. So Julian Love, it doesn't matter the matchup to me. If he got you here, he got me here. He's going to keep starting for me, and I think you should do the same. Just start him and forget it. It might be 10 or 12 expected, but again, he has a high ceiling. It might be 16, 17 points, all coming from tackles. So tackle heavy leagues, Julian Love is insurmountable. You can't really take him out, find one better. So number 4 is Julian Love. Number 5, Kyle Hamilton. He gets a matchup versus Pittsburgh this week. Last week had a down week with only 6 tackles in a good matchup versus the Giants. The Giants on paper were a good matchup. Ardarius Washington had the better game of these two. Now, Kyle Hamilton is ranked still as a top 5 defensive back because when we look at the matchup this week, it's Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh on paper isn't even a good matchup, but I'm looking at history with this one. So Kyle Hamilton is going to play Pittsburgh. They only allow 10 tackles to opposing defensive backs, but the last time Kyle Hamilton played Pittsburgh in Week 11, he had 10 tackles. So, even though Kyle Hamilton had a rough game versus the Giants, I'm putting an asterisk, sloppy game flow got out of hand there. So I think in a game versus Pittsburgh, AFC North, Kyle Hamilton, he's going to be ready to rock. He might even get a sack on Russell Wilson. So I don't know what's going to happen for Kyle Hamilton. I just know it's going to be a lot more productive than last week. So again, a guy who got you here, don't overthink it. It's a great matchup. Not on paper, but really when we look at AFC matchup, the history is telling us that Kyle Hamilton is going to make good in this one here. So not willing to budge on him. Number 6, Brandon Jones already played, made me look good. 10 tackles in a pass defense versus LA. I was a little bit skeptical Chargers have been stingy as far as giving tackles to opponent safeties, but Brandon Jones had no problem in this one, was all over the place, looked like a linebacker. So tremendous production. I'm hoping you started him if you had him, albeit in a bad matchup. So, yeah, that happens sometimes. What's on paper doesn't actually happen in the game. So, Brandon Jones, hopefully you started him. Number 7 also already played. Derwin James didn't do so hot. 5 tackles versus Denver. It was a top 5 matchup. Derwin has been extremely productive versus, and then you throw in the fact that it was a top 5 matchup. I expected better. I'm sure you did too. So we kind of got burned by that one, but hopefully you got you 10 points and didn't kill you this week. Number 8, Grant Delpit versus Kansas City last week was tremendous. 9 total tackles. He's going to get an even better matchup. This is a top 8 matchup as far as tackles in Cincinnati. He's had 6 or more tackles in the last 7 games. So, Grant Delpit here, the perfect example of not overthinking it. You're not going to get 0 points from Delpit. He's going to be involved. He got a great matchup. He's probably going to have 14, 15 points. Don't try to hit 25 and get let down with 0. Take Grant Delpit, who's usually not a top 15 or top 10 play, but in a week where we need 10 points, we need bankable points. Grant Delpit is bankable. So again, he gets a higher nod, like Ugo Amadi. Yeah, Grant Delpit has a way lower ceiling than Ugo Amadi, but he has a way higher floor. So to me, Delpit, I'm going to start him over Ugo Amadi. I'm going to start him over Josh Metellus. I'm going to start him over Jesse Bates. He just has a safer floor. You're not going to win your semis with a defensive back play. You're not going to lose it with a defensive back play. Get your 10, 15 points, move on to the next, get in and get out. And that's exactly what we're doing here. So Grant Delpit, number 8 on my list, in a great matchup, safe floor guy. Hopefully I can say the same about Xavier Woods. He's got a great matchup versus Arizona. Solid game last week versus Dallas with 7 tackles. That was, of course, a good matchup. But Arizona allows the 5th most tackles to safety, so it's an even better matchup. 18.7 tackles allowed to safeties over the last 3 games for Arizona. So Xavier Woods, that's who he's going to play this week. He's got a tremendous, juicy matchup here, and he's been productive over the last 4 games. Woods has had 27 tackles, an interception, a tackle for loss, and 2 passes defense. So Xavier Wood, I expect him to continue having a solid year, and I'm starting him in 2 or 3 semi-leagues myself. So Xavier Woods, confident about him this week. Moving on, maybe somebody who has a higher ceiling but a lower floor because they're questionable right now. I do expect Kyle Duggar to play, and I like him a lot. I'm not done editing this list. He might even go higher than 10. He's been very productive, extremely productive over the last 3 games with 21 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and 2 passes defense. He's averaging 7 tackles, and if you're doing that as a defensive back, you're startable. That's all we can really ask for. All the other tackles for loss, passes defense is just sprinkle on the ice cream, and he gives us that too. So Kyle Duggar, he's going to get a great matchup versus Buffalo. I expect Buffalo to do whatever they want, not let off the gas in this one. Josh Allen wants to win the MVP, so I think Kyle Duggar is going to be awfully busy getting targeted often. Him and Jabril Peppers. Jabril Peppers didn't crack this list, but he's a fine streamer this week. I like both these New England guys. So Kyle Duggar maybe is not owned, somebody who is often injured, so maybe forgot about, but don't forget about him this week. He's somebody who I'd want in my semis matchup. Moving on to number 11, a lower ceiling. I'm sorry, a lower floor, higher ceiling guy here, Brian Branch. A little bit skeptical of him. Of course, he's a walking bomb. We know that Brian Branch can go off any given week. He had 14 tackles and 2 tackles for loss with a pass defense last week, so there it was. But the thing is, this isn't Buffalo anymore, Brian. This is Chicago, so much worse matchup. Week 13, he played Chicago, and Branch had 6 tackles, and that was it. So, again, understand that that's what you're guaranteed is six tackles. He might get 14, he might get interception, forced fumble, all that, but it might just be 5 or 6 tackles. So Brian Branch is a little bit more volatile. Usually consensus rankers at this point will have him higher, probably inside the top 8. But when you have a risk of a lower output game, you don't make the top 12 or top 10 in my semis ranking. So Brian Branch, number 11, still a huge upside, just a little bit risky. Number 12, I like this guy here. I think he's pretty safe. I didn't think that this is the guy who he was, what he did last week. But Dane Belton was absolutely tremendous. The highest scoring safety last week, 15 tackles, a sack, a tackle for loss, and a pass defense. I don't know where this guy came from. Was not expecting it. Tyler Nubin, I didn't think it could get better than him, and it just did. Week 16, he's going to get Atlanta, which is on paper the best matchup as far as tackles allowed to the safety position with 15.8. However, it is going to be Michael Penix, not Kirk Cousins, so that is something to digest and think about. If that changes your mind, to me, it shouldn't. Again, this is a position where I'm not going to, win or lose my matchup. I'm going to take my 10 points, and I think that's what Dane Belton can at least do. Maybe last week wasn't a fluke. Maybe he can get a sack. Maybe he can get 10 tackles. I'm not sure who Dane Belton is, but recent history, you come in and walk in and get 15 tackles. Yeah, I'm pretty impressed. So I think he's in a fine matchup here. He's got the snap percentage. He's playing 100% of snaps, filled in for Nubin now. So this is the guy, Dane Belton. And you can make a case for him to be a top 8, top 5 play. But keep in mind, he's only played one game. So I don't think he's going to repeat and have a double-digit game. That potential may be there, especially in this game. Michael Penix has got something to prove. I don't think the matchup is, completely thrown out because it's a different quarterback. I still think, it's going to be a similar offense, and Michael Penix is going to come in and try to make connections, try to make short throws and not put himself at risk in his first game. So Dane Belton here is a fine start. I think he might have a safer floor, but a lower upside than the next guy, Ugo Amadi. We've seen the upsides, tremendous. Ugo Amadi, I think, is a fine play this week. Last week, I had him a little bit lower in the rankings because I was worried. Washington doesn't use, a lot of sets with 3 wide receivers. They use a lot of 2 tight end sets. So I thought Ugo Amadi, being the slot corner, was going to get affected. The snaps were. Ugo Amadi versus Washington last week was down in the 70s, I believe 73 or 79% snaps. So the snaps were down, which is concerning, but I think it was due to the personnel. And when you look at the box score, Ugo Amadi more than made up for that with 7 tackles, a sack, a tackle for loss, and a pass defense. So what I'm saying is if he can do it last week versus Washington, I think he can do it this week versus Green Bay. And I'm not sure. I already got asked on Twitter what do I think about the weather, if it's going to be cold weather, if it's going to be snow. I'm not sure exactly what that's going to do for Ugo Amadi or safety position as a whole. Maybe, keep the game a little bit shorter. Maybe he helps out in run protection. And I'm not exactly sure Ugo Amadi's his box splits. If he's playing the box, he's getting most of his tackles deep in the slot. I'm not exactly sure. So maybe you want to do that information. Maybe you have that information available. But Ugo Amadi, I'm pretty confident in him this week, at least to be a solid defensive back too. Maybe he gets you 10 points, and it's not the upside you're used to, but I don't think he has a risk for 0. I think he's going to be out there, and he's going to get 8 to 10 points for you, whether that be 4 to 5 tackles, whatever that is in your scoring. So with upside for more, of course. Ugo Amadi has eclipsed that the last 3 or 4 weeks, even though he gets a slight downgrade in matchup. 24 tackles over the last 3 weeks, so that's an average of 8. He's also got a sack, a tackle for loss, and 4 passes defense. So doesn't have to, absolutely get tackles to make good for your fantasy team, but it does help. Ugo Amadi, bottom line, solid player, solid DB2. Just don't expect the moon. Aim for the stars, but you might get let down a little bit. That's all. Xavier McKinney, number 14. Versus New Orleans. Last week, that's who he's going to get this week, New Orleans. But last week versus Seattle, he had 5 tackles. A little bit of a down game for him. Didn't have an interception. Didn't have any passes defensed. So that was a little bit concerning. But I'm fine with Xavier McKinney. He's been fine all year. He's the guy who got you here. It's a good matchup. New Orleans is allowing 17 tackles per game to the safety over the last 3 games, which is top 8. And again, I think, like I said before, I think New Orleans is going to be down in this game. They're going to have to throw the ball. I don't know who that's going to be to, but that's good news for Xavier McKinney. I think they're going to have to play a lot of catch up here, and Xavier McKinney's going to have ample opportunities for tackles. So we saw his floor last week, 5 tackles, 10 points in my league. I don't know what it is in yours, but I'm fine to live with that. And Seattle was a good matchup. That is a little bit of alarming, but Xavier McKinney, I think it was an asterisk. Stud dude, especially if you're in a league where it's not tackle heavy and you're getting a lot of points for interceptions. Xavier McKinney gets a special bit of love in those kind of leagues. So I think number 14 is pretty safe, pretty fair, no matter your scoring for Xavier McKinney. Finally, at number 15, you won't find him on many top 20 or top 30 consensus. He's outside of there, but I just want to put him on the map this week. Not forget about the big game he had, and that is Jeremy Chinn. Jeremy Chinn is going to play Philadelphia this week. As we all remember, that's the game he had 13 tackles. It was a Thursday night game. He was all over the place versus Philadelphia. So I really like Jeremy Chinn a lot. I'm kind of torn. Like, he had those 3 weeks where he had 13 tackles in a row. Literally had 13 tackles, 3 straight games. And then we saw him fall off for a couple weeks, which is nothing we're not accustomed to this year. He's been up and down. He's been streaky. But even though this is a bad on paper matchup to Philadelphia, the last time they played, he had 13 tackles. So I cannot get that out of my head. Jeremy Chinn, last game was very productive, so maybe he's getting hot again. Last week versus New Orleans, he had 7 tackles, a sack, 2 tackles for loss. He was incredibly productive. So, you mix a good matchup last week, and he was able to get those tackles, get that sack. Now you look at a matchup where isn't as great on paper, but he's already excelled versus Philadelphia. So Jeremy Chinn, whether he's 15 or 20 on your rankings, it doesn't matter. All I'm kind of saying is all these rankings out here have him at like 38 and 40. I think that's big time disrespect. I think if you're really in a deep league, like, this is a guy you want to take a shot on. Yeah, if you're in a 1 or 2 man DB league, you want Brandon Jones, you want the safe play, you want to take the 8 or 10. If you're in a very deep league, yeah, you got to throw some darts, and I think Jeremy Chinn is a great dart to throw. He's a walking bomb, huge upside, and like I said, we saw what he can do against Philly. I can't get it out of my head. I'm trying to preach it to you. Maybe you can, get it out of your head. But Jeremy Chinn, that's the last defensive back I got. And I have some great defensive backs I didn't mention. I have Chinn, Xavier McKinney, Ugo Amadi, all over guys like Hamlin, Taylor Rapp, Josh Metellus, Jesse Bates, Jordan Battle, Jabril Peppers, Adarius Washington. These are fine plays too, although they just didn't crack my top 15. Hey, I know I went on a long tangent here. These are long, but I appreciate you guys rocking with me. If you have any questions, I know I didn't get over honorable mentions. I went a little long on that, but if you have any questions as far as who to start, ask me. I'll get back to you. I appreciate all those people that leave nice comments, that come back for more and give me their time. So I appreciate that. And best of luck in your semi matchups. We will see you back here in the championship, baby. Go get it this week. Play smart. Don't take too many risks, and go out there and get it. Let your offense win it, baby. Until next time, best of luck in these semis. We will see you in the finals.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.